think of AI as a tool. For me, AI is a way of thinking. It's just not a technology. So, you have to think about that.
Yes.
And then, kind of because it's still in early stages, we have the power to shape the future of AI.
Hello, and welcome to a brand new episode of Engatica's interview series. I'm your host, Nimilika, and we are really glad to have you join us today. And today we have Dr. Djamila Amimer, CEO and founder of Mind Senses Global. Welcome to the show, Djamila.
Hi, Mimi. Thanks for the invitation. Really glad to be with you and address your audience.
We're really glad to have you today. The Engatica interview series is a powerhouse of insights from industry experts and influencers from around the world, a platform that provides the latest news on AI, automation, and technologies that will help you grow your business. Come, be a part of our community, learn, share, and grow with us. Jamila, shall we start our conversation?
Let's go.
Okay. So, how do you think organizations can ensure the use of ethical AI in their practices?
That's a very important question, Nimi. Thank you, because bias and the ethical use of AI is a very important topic. I think to address it, businesses need to be first aware of it. We cannot address something that we are not aware of it. So I think there is a lot of awareness and education that has to take place, because a lot of people, not just in businesses but around, they're just not aware of the risks and the ethical issues and the bias that AI can have. So I think first they need to start with awareness and educating their teams around the potential ethical implication and bias of AI. That's the first block. Second block, once we are aware, then we start thinking, okay, what can we do about it? There are like a lot of things that could be done. One is what we call having in place ethical use of AI, or ethics AI principles. I'm sure you have heard the likes of IBM's, Microsoft, a lot of those big companies have come up with their own principles. So it's like a checklist of things that they need to check, need to to do to make sure that their AI has mitigated the risk of the bias and the ethical use. So I think one is around awareness in education. The other ones is to have principles in place, and the third one is then to comply with this, because what happens is it's always cheaper to address problems at the beginning. So if you have principles in place and you check them and you find that there is a problem with it, then it's cheaper to make a modification to your AI model, rather than to wait until the end of your AI model. So you have built it, you have trained it, you have tested, and then we found out that there is a problem, and then it becomes very, very expensive to fix it. So those are my tips for the business on how to go ahead around mitigating the ethical use of AI, the bias issues with that.
True. And I have a follow-up question here. So you mentioned that companies should have a set of principles. So how do we know that every company is having the same set of principles? Is it like the sustainable development goals that we have, or should we make new goals like that for all companies to follow? How do we ensure that we make it happen?
That's a very, what I call like a golden question. That's a very good question. So the issue we have right now is that like companies have come up with principles. They may have a slightly different principle than company B, but it's not just companies, it's also governments. So for example, the UK government may have a certain come up with the principle compared to the US and so on. So there is an issue on how you make those standards and those principles global everywhere. There are like some initiative, for example, the European Commission has come up with a set of work, to work out those standards and principles. They like work at like the United Nations. They like some work with the OECD countries. So there are some attempts on how to make these global, but we are not yet there. I think, there is a lot of work, to have a global international standards and principle that everyone can, adhere to.
True,
Definitely
true.
it's needed.
That's a work in progress then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then is multimodality the next improvement needed for usable AI models?
Well, that's again another good question. So I think for AI, will address it in terms of the future of AI and how we can progress AI. So I
Yeah.
think for us to progress AI, there are a lot of missing parts. It's not just about multimodality. So I'll talk about kind of, so the current AI we have right now, it's what we call narrow AI. So it's a type of AI. And by the way, if you are in business, when we talk about AI, most of the time, we will be talking about, machine learning. But basically, narrow AI, this application only work for those specific. So you have, I don't know, you have fraud application to detect fraud at the bank, or a chatbot in retail. Then you take those applications out of their environment, you put it in a different environment, it totally fails because it's narrow. It only does what it has been designed to do. Now, talking about the future, and I guess kind of in case we will be talking about general artificial intelligence, there are like building blocks in my thinking that needs to take place. One, what I refer to as causal reasoning. So the current AI we have right now doesn't reason, doesn't understand. So if we take the example of malaria and fever, AI can find the correlation between malaria and fever. The current AI we have does not understand that malaria causes fever. So the whole causal reasoning is missing from the current AI. I'm not going to go into too much details, but there are also other blocks like the transfer of learning. How can you transfer one learning to another area? That is also missing. There is also the computational efficiency. So for example, we've seen these big models, especially on the language modeling, Q&A type of AI modeling, that are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. GPT-3 has 194 billion parameters,
Yes,
and
yes.
the electricity to run that, to train that model was equivalent to driving to the moon and back in terms of the carbon emission. So we are talking about really big model. But then when we look at a toddler, if you want to give a picture of a dog and a cat to differentiate between this is a cat and this is a dog, you wouldn't give them 100,000 of pictures. You only may give them a handful of pictures, then they will get it. That's not the case with AI. AI is really data hungry. It's getting bigger and bigger. So the missing link in here is computational efficiency. The computations of the current AI are not efficient. So all those blocks will need to be sorted and addressed in the future if we want to progress AI. And I think I'll stop at there because it's a very big topic. I can spend hours
True.
talking about it.
True. And here also I have a follow-up question. So when we eventually reach a place where we do transfer learning, will AI become plug and play?
I can play.
Plug and play. So instead of having narrow AI, which is very domain
Yeah.
specific, will it become plug and play where you can pick any domain, have the AI there, and it will start working for that domain?
Well, that's the aspiration. Now, whether it's going to be achievable or not, that's a question, and whether we can get it sooner or rather later. I think kind of like the indication, we are talking potentially about like decades to be able to get there because we are just very far from it.
Yeah. And so how do you think businesses can unlock this AI potential?
So I think the potential, especially when we talk about machine learning, because it is a subset of AI, and that's the most used area of AI in business, because it's all
Yes.
about predictions. So one is for the businesses, they need to understand how AI can improve their business performance, the
Mm.
way it can improve. And so, for example, AI in business, you can use it to reduce your risk. You can use it, for example, reducing the fraud risk. You can use it to reduce costs. So if you are a manufacturer and you have a factory, you can use AI to predict your when your equipment is going to, basically fail. So you will reduce your downtime cost. You can use AI to improve your customer experience through
Yes.
conversational AI. You can
Mm.
also use AI to improve your margin through optimization. The like of Amazon, they optimize that pricing every 10 minutes. So you
Mm.
need to understand the way, those area, and in each area AI will be applied in a different way. So you have to understand that. The second bit is, you have to look around, look at your competitor. How are they using AI?
Mm.
Can you find a
Yes.
way that they haven't used it so far, so you can then get that competitive advantage? The third block is, you cannot use AI without data and without infrastructure. So if you
Very
want to
true.
use AI, then you need to have a strategy in place. You need to have a plan in place. Do you have the right data? Have the infrastructure to collect that data. So that's
True.
another block. Then you move into what is really critical for me whenever I speak at conferences or to clients. They usually say, I would like to apply AI, and I say, wait a minute, you have to consider AI as a tool. So it's not an end in itself. You have always to start with your problem and say, wait a minute, tell me your problem, let's understand your problem, and then see if
Exactly.
AI can solve it for you. And I think that's really, really you have to take that approach. Otherwise, it's going to get lost, somewhere. Then the idea, once you have that, then you have the choice. Do you go, in terms of how do you build your, talent, AI talent capabilities inside the house? Do you first go with external consultant that
Mm.
help you at least start? Then in the meantime, you start recruiting and you start building your capabilities. So you have to think holistically about that. And more importantly,
Yes.
you need to have an AI strategy. And that AI strategy, so say, I am here, I want to be there, and those are the steps that I need to take to get there. But more importantly, that AI strategy has to fit in within your current business strategy. If your AI strategy is very different from your business strategy, then you have a problem.
True.
And I
True.
think taking all those things into consideration, that's what makes you unlock the AI potential, in your business. And one last step. So with other technologies, we tend to think that the longer we wait, the cost of it goes down, which is true, and we are seeing it with AI. The cost of running AI is getting,
Mm.
maybe it's still expensive, but the likelihood is that it will get cheaper, in the future. But people forget that for me, AI is not just a technology; it's a way of thinking. For your business to thrive, you need to have AI in your DNA culture of the company. And to get that culture, it takes a long time to get there. So you may wait for the cost to get down, but you are losing into that, getting your, the culture of the organization right. So I say, if you haven't thought about applying AI, start thinking now. Don't wait for the cost to get down, because you will be losing on the implementation cost of it.
Very, very true. Actually, I was thinking about this point, the fourth point that you mentioned, that
Mm,
the application should need AI. It's not just because AI is the buzzword, I'll start using it everywhere and I'll start making my
absolutely.
application smart. Yeah, you have got the right point, and I'm very happy. Yes. And then, which companies or community groups are at the forefront to make AI accessible to everybody?
So obviously we have the tech, the tech giants, the like of Google, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft, because they have the scale and they have the power and they have the money. Then obviously they're reaching far a lot more, people that way. Having said that, it's not only about like the big giants. We also see small research group, small, kind of like maybe, voluntary groups, charities, even individuals like me, AI experts, they're like, pockets of players who would like, to make AI accessible and who would like to raise that awareness. And you can see them, people talking on conferences, on podcasts, writing articles, writing books. So I think it's all that together that hopefully make a difference, but have so far the biggest impact in terms of numbers.
Yeah. And how do you think AI can play a role in solving humanity challenges, like, for example, climate change?
Yeah, so again, going back to looking at AI as the tool, not an end to it. So AI is not a magic thing. It's not kind of suddenly wake up and solve all the problem we have. But
Yes.
we as a human, we have the power to use AI for good. So there are examples where AI has currently been used for. So for example, like several examples where AI has been used, for example, to address mental, illness, to help, predict when the next earthquake is going to happen, to help, look at deforestation. So there are topics that AI is helping, but definitely, yeah, with climate change. So there are areas where AI can help. So for example, we know that, big challenge for the energy transition, transitioning from oil and gas to, hopefully renewables and green, green energy. It's important. We also know that the renewable energy, like, wind and solar, really good, but the challenge with them is they're intermittent, so they're not always available. So you only have the wind when it's windy, you only have the energy solar when there is sunshine. There is a problem, there is still a challenge around storing them. So AI could be used, for example, to predict supply and demand. It's all about how can you match electricity supply with electricity demand. If you can do that, then you can reduce the burden of using coal and gas as a redundant plan for when renewables fail, for example. AI can also be used, for example, to reduce or to help reduce the or improve the building energy service. So we all have those smart meters, we have all those smart temperature kind of readers where you can, so Alexa can, for example, switch on or off your air conditioning, where, for example, you are not at the house, or put them when you need them. So this is also another way where those smart AI kind of application can help us reduce our consumption, and and indirectly address some of the issues around the climate change.
Yeah. And you've mentioned that AI can be used for health related issues like mental illness or maybe cancer detection. How how can we avoid false positives? Because one false positive can make a very big bad impact in what happens to that individual's health. How do we take care of that?
Absolutely. That's another great topic. So the issue we have with the current AI is its accuracy rate. And we may think that 96% or 95% is a high one. Yeah, it is high, but it all depends on where you use it. So for example, if I'm using Netflix, and we know Netflix use AI to come up with recommending to you the next movie, it doesn't matter for me if the engine recommend the wrong movie to me. That's kind of a low impact thing. But if we are using AI to come up with a diagnosis of cancer, or to come up with a billion decision on business, that's a big thing. We need to make sure that kind of the AI recommendation, or it's accurate. So we are not yet there in terms of the accuracy, but I think kind of how we get there once is to understand again, going back to understanding the AI risks. So understanding your model. So we know that a lot of nowadays people, especially because AI and data science has been so accessible, you can just go to a camp, do maybe a 10-day, 2 weeks, and then you get the certification, and somehow you become an AI expert or a data scientist, and you start building models and employ them. And have nothing against that. I think it's a good thing, but I think we need some humility and to be humble, know that obviously you have learned some stuff and it is useful, but it doesn't mean that you know everything. So when you're deploying those models, need to make sure that you understand the limitation of those models. You understand the mathematics, behind those models. AI, it's fancy, but most of it is mathematics, basically. Especially if you're using it for those critical type of application, you really need to understand what you are talking about. You understand what you are building, and how you are building it, and how you are testing it, and which data you are using. Do you understand your data? So it's not to diminish from, or the capabilities of these, but you don't have to stop. You have to continue. Otherwise, this is where we are getting into a problem. We're getting in a problem where everyone seems to understand and know AI and try to apply it, and then oops, we have a problem here. Yeah, we have a problem because at the beginning you haven't thought of it for. So I think kind of going back, awareness and education, and have some rigor in the way AI is applied is important.
So true. I just loved your explanation about this. Just made me happy that people do not have the mathematical knowledge. They seem to have the application level knowledge of AI, and they start using the models, and there's no full awareness. There's only semi-awareness that's happening around the world. It's amazing explanation. And what do you think are the emerging areas in AI that we can watch out for?
So there are a number of emerging trends in AI, especially after COVID 19. So we've seen obviously AI has been used at least to try to tackle COVID. So I don't know if you had the Moderna vaccine, but for those who had Moderna vaccine, then just to tell them that they have used AI to come up with that vaccine, and to come up with basically the combination, because there were hundreds, thousands of combination. So they use AI to find the sequences of that RNA vaccine. They have also used during COVID AI to try to do triage of patients. So which patient, because COVID, there's some people who got like severe illness, and some people who get like mild illness. So how can you predict from the beginning who is going to get the severe one, so you can treat them, at the very early stages. So that's going to continue. We will see a lot of spending of AI in healthcare. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have issues. The issues and the risks are there, but the money is also pouring, so things will be happening in that area. Another area, again, because of COVID, we've seen education and getting educated in a virtual world. So there will be a lot of spending in terms of AI in education. So it's all about tailoring. So your education, depending to the profile of the user, so it goes at the right pace and so on. We will see again supply chain, a lot of AI investments, and in the supply chain, again, because we've seen how COVID has severely disrupted supply chain. So can we use AI to predict bottlenecks before they happen, so we can solve them before they happen? So that's one of the application in the supply chain area. Digital twin technology combined with AI. So again, because of COVID, so kind of digital twin is, so basically you are simulating something that is in real world, in virtual world. So what, if you can do that with AI, then you can predict when something wrong is going to happen in the virtual world, then you can fix it so it never happens in the real world, basically.
Yeah.
So there are like a
Yes.
lot of combination around AI and digital twin technology. Obviously, also AI with drone technology. We've seen drones kind of like being used to deliver parcels during the, COVID. So those type of application will, go ahead. So yeah, so kind of, and across the economies, we will see more AI adoption, across all the different sector. Obviously, so those are the opportunity. The issues will be there. So the issues around the ethical use, around the bias, and
Yes.
so
Yes.
on. There's still a big, stamp, in the AI topic. So people will still be raising awareness. People will still finding, trying to find solutions, to mitigate these.
Yeah. Yeah. That is very interesting. So, do you have any other sound bites you would like to share with our audience?
Oh, I guess, going back to the original one, think of AI as a tool. For me, AI is a way of thinking. It's just not a technology. So, you have to think about that.
Yes.
Uh, and then, kind of be, because it's still in early stages, we have the power to shape the future of AI. But the way we shape it, we need to have more of women in the AI talent. There is a lack of, people from, ethnic minorities. So we need a very good representation to make AI so diverse and so rich, because that's the way on how we will progress AI in the future.
So true. I had the best time having this conversation with you, Jamila. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights with us. For more content, subscribe to Engati and tap the bell icon to get access to exclusive content from thought leaders from around the globe. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you with a new expert soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamila.